Can you believe that in just one moment, an entire city could vanish, as if it never existed? Welcome to a journey into the most terrifying disasters Earth has ever endured, from nature's wrath to human-triggered catastrophes, from the rage of the planet itself to cosmic fists from above. Earth has screamed, and the scars remain forever. Sometimes it's a strange phenomenon, not deadly, but enough to drape a whole region in fear. Sometimes it's a thunderous descent from the heavens, like a god unleashed. What would you do if you witnessed that moment? Would you run or stand frozen, staring into the falling sky? And now, we begin with one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, in the desolate taiga forests of Siberia, there was no warning, only a frozen silence. Then, a blast shook the earth and rewrote history. And then, a silence so eerie, it felt supernatural, as if the entire universe had paused. The pale sun began to rise timidly over the horizon, its rays threading gently through the pine trees, when suddenly, the northern sky burst open in a blinding light, as if a second sun had torn through the heavens. A colossal fireball ripped across the sky, leaving behind a blazing scar slashed through the atmosphere like a blade of light. It was so bright that even in broad daylight, the glow could still be seen. That monstrous presence, nothing less than a meteor, was descending with a velocity beyond human comprehension. And in mere seconds, it exploded mid-air, about 5 kilometers above the Earth. Not a traditional fireball, but a release of raw energy so fierce, it could have annihilated an ancient city had it struck directly. Its energy detonated all at once, like a cosmic punch crashing down from the heavens, flattening everything below. Nearly 80 million trees toppled over as if they were mere matchsticks, crushed beneath the invisible hand of a celestial fury. But what haunted people most wasn't the explosion. It was the silence that followed, a thick, choking stillness, as if the earth had stopped breathing. After the shockwave passed, the forest fell silent, broken only by the distant creak of falling trees, like nature's final breath. The area was remote. Few humans were nearby, but hundreds of reindeer, vital to native tribes, died instantly, as if the universe had sent a warning that nothing on Earth is truly untouchable. And while that blast came suddenly from the sky, disaster arrived slowly on the island of Martinique, yet struck even harder. By early April, Mount Pelée was breathing smoke. Ash rained like a deathly veil over sugarcane fields, yet people stayed because they believed the mountain would sleep again. On May 8, 1902, a peaceful island stood on the edge of nightmare. At dawn, tropical humidity hung thick in the air as Mount Pelée loomed like a ghost above Saint-Pierre. Then came a deafening roar from deep within the earth. The sky turned a dark, ashen gray as a towering cloud of gas and volcanic ash surged upward. In seconds, a blazing avalanche of gas, ash, and stone thundered down the mountainside and swallowed the city whole. The heat was so intense, wooden buildings burst into flames instantly, and citizens, unable to escape, were turned to charcoal on contact with the fiery wave. Saint-Pierre, once called the Paris of the Caribbean, was gone in the blink of an eye. Within minutes, Saint-Pierre, the Paris of the Caribbean, was erased from the earth. Over 30,000 lives lost in a flash of fire. The city became rubble, buried beneath a thick layer of ash and volcanic stone. Mount Pelée, once a symbol of life and pride, had turned into a brutal reminder of nature's unstoppable fury. But that wasn't the worst volcanic catastrophe in history. Nearly 3,600 years ago, on the island of Thera, now called Santorini, a doomsday eruption was unfolding. Akrotiri, the jewel of Minoan civilization, stood as proof of their advanced knowledge and engineering. Then the ground shook, the sea boiled, the sky darkened like a bottomless void, and that great civilization vanished without a clear trace. Have you ever wondered, if we were to live through such a moment again, would history repeat itself? The Minoans, centered on the island of Crete, were masters of the sea. Their ships carved paths across the Mediterranean, like veins of trade and culture. Thera, a key outpost in their network, became a golden link between civilizations. But deep beneath the island's surface, something ancient was stirring. Silently, dangerously, magma gathered like a storm, coiled beneath the crust. Then one day, the ground began to quake violently. A volcano, dormant for centuries, suddenly awakened. Explosions shattered the air, echoing across the Mediterranean. Clouds of ash, toxic gas, and burning rock filled the sky. The eruption was so powerful, the center of the island collapsed, leaving behind a vast, gaping caldera, like a scorched scar carved into the heart of the sea. It is believed that some residents of Thera managed to escape by boat, fleeing desperately to nearby islands or the mainland. But Akrotiri, the island's heart, was buried under a thick blanket of volcanic ash. In just minutes, during explosive eruptions, towering plumes rise like heaven-piercing fury, releasing millions of tons of rock and pyroclastic fire. A massive collapse of ash and debris into the sea triggered a catastrophic tsunami that swept across the coasts of Crete and nearby islands like a blazing blade of the ocean. The Minoan civilization, once the ruler of the Aegean, was broken in that moment and never truly recovered. More than 1,000 years later, the Greek philosopher Plato would speak of a mysterious sunken world in two dialogues called Timaeus and Critias. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. In Timaeus and Critias, Plato described a glorious civilization named Atlantis, a wealthy empire, advanced in technology, powerful in war. But in a single day and night, it was swallowed by the sea, lost forever in a great flood. It's fascinating to think that perhaps the story of the Thera eruption, passed down through generations, mixed with myth, may have reached Plato's ears. From history, transformed into legend. But Atlantis wasn't the end. Even the modern world has witnessed nature's fury. On April 10th, 1815, on the remote island of Sumbawa, Indonesia, a day that began like any other, was about to mark the start of a global nightmare. Mount Tambora was about to awaken. But deep within Mount Tambora, Something dangerous was building, silent and unstoppable. Then suddenly, the ground shook with a deafening roar, followed by an eruption that rocked the entire island. A column of ash and searing gas shot into the sky, turning daylight into darkness. The explosion was heard over 2,000 kilometers away. As far as Sumatra and Java, Tambora, dormant for centuries, had become a cauldron of destruction, unleashing energy equal to hundreds of nuclear bombs detonating at once. Molten lava surged downward at terrifying speed, and in mere seconds, entire villages at the base of the mountain were gone. No one had time to run. The nearby islands, once green and fertile, were buried beneath volcanic ash. Tsunamis slammed into the coasts, sweeping away what remained. It's estimated that at least 70,000 people died from the eruption, the toxic gases, and the waves. But that was only the beginning, because the true scale of the disaster reached far beyond the island. Tambora launched millions of tons of ash and sulfur into the atmosphere, forming a veil that spread across the globe. In 1816, it became known as the year without a summer. The sun dimmed, crops failed, and the world grew colder, as if winter had stolen the calendar. In New England, USA, snow fell in midsummer. The skies were shrouded in strange mist, and humanity slipped into a season that even time couldn't melt. In Europe, the rain didn't stop. Skies turned to ash, and the cold destroyed entire harvests. Wheat rotted, corn withered, and hunger spread like smoke through rural lands. In Asia, violent monsoons flooded villages, turning rivers into weapons. The world slipped into a dark, chilling trance. And from this gloom, Mary Shelley gave birth to Frankenstein, a creature forged not from lightning, but from human despair. A monster, born from a summer without sunlight. But nature wasn't done yet. On March 18th, 1925, the skies above America's Midwest turned charcoal gray. A surge of hot, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico rushed north, colliding with a cold blade of wind from the Rockies. And in that instant, the sky tore open. A massive supercell formed and began to spin. From that swirling mass rose a monster with no eyes, no mercy, just a roaring column of wind and death. It tore across 3 states, flattening homes, schools, entire towns in minutes. No warning, no shelter, only screaming winds, rising earth, and total, unstoppable terror. The tri-state tornado touched down near Ellington in southeastern Missouri. And from that moment, a spinning nightmare began the longest path of destruction in US history. It moved with terrifying consistency and unimaginable force. Classified as an F5, the highest level of devastation, it wasn't just wind. It was a black, cold vortex that swallowed everything. It tore through Annapolis, a quiet, small town, and in seconds, homes, schools, and businesses were ripped from their foundations, not just destroyed, but erased. The tornado then surged northeast, crossing the Mississippi River, and slammed into Murfreesboro, Illinois, like a beast unleashed from the sky. There, it didn't just flatten, it pulverized, but it wasn't finished. The small town of DeSoto stood next. A place barely marked on a map became the next victim of its path. The entire town was flattened completely, as if it had never existed. After flattening DeSoto, the massive tornado continued into Indiana, stretching its trail of ruin. Nearly 700 people were killed, making it the deadliest tornado in US history. But not all disasters rise from the ground. On September 1st, 1859, Earth was struck by a fury from the sun. On its fiery surface, massive sunspots emerged, signaling something brewing deep within. As astronomers, including Richard Carrington, observed closely, a sudden solar flare erupted. It was so powerful, it hurled a massive cloud of plasma and magnetism straight toward Earth, an invisible storm, strong enough to tear into Earth's magnetic field. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. Normally, solar storms take days to reach Earth, but this one arrived in just 17 hours. When it struck our magnetic field, it triggered an unprecedented geomagnetic storm. The night sky erupted in auroras, so bright they were seen as far south as the Caribbean. Red, green, and violet lights painted the heavens, surreal and terrifying, causing many to fear the end had come. But the real blow hit humanity's early technology. In Europe and North America, telegraph lines overloaded. Sparks flew from machines. Some offices even caught fire. Operators reported arcs of electricity jumping from their hands. Communication plunged into chaos. Thankfully, no one died. But the Carrington event was a warning from the cosmos, and next time, we may not be so lucky. If a Carrington-scale event struck today, the consequences would be catastrophic. Satellites in orbit could be disabled, GPS wiped out, global communication cut off, power grids would collapse, the internet would vanish, digital transactions frozen, stock markets would crash. No electricity, no data, no connection. Modern cities would spiral into panic. Chaos spreading faster than flame, all triggered by an invisible burst from a star 150 million kilometers away. But if you think that's the end, look to the past. On August 24th, 79 AD, in the Bay of Naples, Italy, Mount Vesuvius, calm and silent, awoke. It was a morning like any other. In Pompeii, the prosperous jewel of Rome, no one knew it would be their final sunrise. In the days before, the ground trembled softly. But in Pompeii, where Mount Vesuvius had slumbered for centuries, no one truly worried until noon on August 24th, 79 AD, when the mountain awoke like a provoked beast. A massive column of ash and poisonous gas shot into the sky, spreading outward like a black hand tearing through the heavens, plunging Pompeii into darkness at midday. The first stage brought a rain of pumice and ash, falling like blades from above. Roofs collapsed, families trapped inside, scrambling to escape. But that was only the warning. By midnight, Vesuvius unleashed its final, most devastating phase. Pyroclastic flows, searing waves of gas, ash, and molten rock roared down the slopes at over 100 kilometers per hour, hot enough to vaporize flesh in an instant. No one had time to run or scream. Pompeii was buried entirely, and time froze in the final breath of an ancient city. Burning clouds of gas, ash, and stone surged down the slopes at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour. They didn't just destroy They erased everything in their path. Temperatures reached 500 degrees Celsius, hot enough to scorch flesh and freeze bodies in a final, contorted pose. Those who couldn't escape, trapped in their homes or caught in the streets, died instantly, buried alive beneath volcanic ash in Pompeii and Herculaneum. Thousands perished in this way. 2 cities, gone in hours, far away in Rome. The Roman Empire reeled in horror. Emperor Titus, just 1 year into his rule, ordered rescue missions and rebuilding efforts, but nature's wrath exceeded the power of even the greatest empire of its time. Pompeii, Herculaneum, and neighboring towns were never rebuilt. They remained frozen tombs of stone and silence. Centuries later, when Pompeii was unearthed, the world didn't just find a buried city. It found frozen moments of life, bodies locked in flight, faces twisted in terror. Time had stopped at the exact second death arrived. Nearly 2,000 years later, on the other side of the world, in remote Lituya Bay, Alaska, nature screamed once more. On July 9th, 1958, a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck near the Fairweather Fault. Shaking the land violently, a mountainside collapsed, sending a massive chunk of earth crashing into the narrow waters of Lituya Bay. The impact, like the punch of a sleeping god, launched a wave of unimaginable size. The first wave rose to 524 meters high, taller than the Empire State Building. It became the tallest tsunami ever recorded in human history. In a single moment, Lituya Bay was swallowed by the sea, as if it had never existed. That towering wave surged up the steep slopes of Lituya Bay like a raging beast. It leveled thousands of ancient trees, leaving a giant scar carved into the rock, still visible to this day. Its force was so immense, it swept entire forests, boulders, and debris out into the open sea, as if wiping the earth clean. At that moment, 3 fishing boats were inside the bay. 2 were swallowed instantly. But the third, in an almost mythic twist, was lifted high by the wave, carried across the top of the bay, and gently set back down. Its crew miraculously alive. Despite its fury, only 5 people died, spared by the bay's isolation. But the idea of world-ending floods isn't just real, it's ancient. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving story in human history, the gods decide to flood the earth as punishment for mankind, a flood of legend. And only one man survives, Utnapishtim, the keeper of immortality, and the first echo of humanity's fear of being erased. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. Utnapishtim tells how the gods grew furious at mankind's arrogance and chaos. They no longer sought to correct, but to wipe all life from the earth with a great flood. But one god, Ea, still carried mercy in his heart. He whispered a warning to Utnapishtim and told him how to build a great ship to preserve what mattered most. Utnapishtim obeyed. He gathered his family, pairs of animals, and seeds of every plant, and stepped aboard his wooden ark as darkness began to rise. Then the rain fell. For 6 days and 7 nights, it poured without end, drowning the earth and erasing life from its surface. On the 7th day, the waters began to retreat, and his ship came to rest on Mount Nyos, the final refuge in a sea without borders. To know if the land had dried, He released 3 birds, a dove, returned, a swallow, returned, but the raven never came back, and Utnapishtim knew the world had found its foothold once more. Centuries later, similar stories re-emerged, this time in the Bible. Noah was described as a man righteous and blameless, living in a world consumed by corruption and violence. Seeing mankind's wickedness, God chose to cleanse the earth with a great flood. Only Noah and his family were chosen to survive. God commanded him to build a massive ark, giving detailed instructions for its size and design. Noah gathered his family, pairs of animals, and all things needed to begin again. Then the rain came. For 40 days and 40 nights. It rained without end. The ark floated through endless waters, as all life outside was swept away. Finally, when Noah released a dove, it returned holding an olive branch, the first sign of hope, of a new beginning in a world washed clean. The connection between the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh and Noah's Ark in the Bible has long been debated. 2 stories from 2 cultures, yet hauntingly similar. Many scholars believe they may both stem from a real historical flood in the ancient Near East, in the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Mesopotamian civilization once flourished, but that region was also plagued by seasonal flooding, and sometimes the water didn't just nourish the fields, it erased entire towns and villages, passed down through generations. A real flood became a timeless legend. Another theory goes even further back, around 12,000 years ago. At the end of the last ice age, glaciers began to melt, sea levels rose globally, coastal lands where humanity first built its earliest settlements were lost forever beneath the waves, perhaps deep in our collective memory. We are still telling the story of the day the world was swallowed by water. Around 66 million years ago, in the vast emptiness of space, a massive asteroid, nearly 15 kilometers wide, was hurtling toward Earth. Its origin? Possibly the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. As it entered Earth's atmosphere, the friction didn't slow it down. Instead, it turned the asteroid into a blazing fireball. Then, impact. It struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, releasing energy equal to billions of nuclear bombs. The collision carved out the Chicxulub crater, spanning over 180 kilometers. It triggered global earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and sent debris high into the atmosphere. The sun disappeared behind a global dust cloud. Temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis collapsed, and with it, the food chain. This marked the end of the Cretaceous period and the extinction of the dinosaurs. But from that devastation, a new chapter of life began, one that would eventually lead to us. The impact vaporized everything at ground zero. A shockwave of unimaginable force radiated outward, incinerating everything nearby. It triggered massive earthquakes, shaking the entire planet. Because the asteroid hit near the ocean, towering tsunamis surged across coastlines. But this was only the beginning. The collision hurled billions of tons of debris and molten rock into the atmosphere. A deadly rain of fiery fragments fell from the skies. Wildfires ignited everywhere, scorching entire continents. Thick clouds of dust and sulfurous particles blanketed the planet. Sunlight vanished. Earth was plunged into a global darkness. Temperatures plummeted. A nuclear winter-like effect gripped the world. Plants died. Herbivores starved. Predators followed. The food chain collapsed. And just like that, the age of dinosaurs was over. After the massive asteroid impact, dust and ash covered the sky for years. Sunlight couldn't penetrate. Plants began to die, and with them, the herbivores. Eventually, most dinosaurs, rulers of Earth for millions of years, vanished. Yet even in this darkness, life wasn't entirely extinguished. Tiny mammals, once hiding beneath the feet of dinosaurs, now had their chance to rise. No longer hunted, they thrived. Their brains grew larger, and with that, their ability to think, feel, and adapt expanded. It was in this shadowed era that the seeds of the future were sown. Humanity, our distant ancestors, the primates, began their long and extraordinary journey, but Earth's turmoil wasn't over yet. Roughly 8,200 years ago, another mysterious climate shock would once again shake the planet. It all began with the massive Laurentide ice sheet, covering much of present-day Canada. As the last ice age ended and temperatures rose, gigantic glaciers began to melt. These meltwaters formed enormous glacial lakes, including Lake Agassiz, held back by a fragile wall of ice. But as the pressure mounted and temperatures climbed, one day, the icy dam collapsed. A colossal flood of fresh water, like a biblical deluge, rushed into the North Atlantic. The sudden pulse of cold water disrupted the global ocean circulation system. In moments, Earth plunged into a sudden cold spell. Climate shifted violently, crops failed, and early human societies faced brutal hardship. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. The result? A dramatic temperature drop across the northern hemisphere, lasting nearly 200 years. The climate turned colder and drier, devastating early farming communities. Across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, once fertile lands became barren, and crops failed. Primitive agricultural civilizations teetered on the edge of collapse. Fast forward 8 millennia. In 1986, deep in the remote mountains of northwestern Cameroon, Lake Nyos, calm and scenic, hid a deadly secret. Beneath its tranquil surface, carbon dioxide had been building up silently for years. Then a landslide triggered a rare phenomenon, a limnic eruption. In seconds, a massive cloud of invisible gas erupted from the lake, blanketing nearby villages. 1,746 people and thousands of animals died, unable to escape the suffocating CO2. What appeared to be a peaceful mountain lake was in fact a silent killer waiting to strike. For years, volcanic carbon dioxide had seeped from underground, dissolving into the deep waters of Lake Nyos. Over time, the lake turned into a deadly trap, storing hundreds of thousands of tons of toxic gas at its bottom. On the night of August 21st, 1986, an unknown event, perhaps a landslide or minor eruption, disturbed the lake's surface. Then, a rare phenomenon occurred, a limnic eruption, a massive, invisible CO2 cloud, heavier than air, burst from the lake and crept down nearby valleys. Every living creature in its path suffocated silently. By morning, the villages lay eerily still. 1,746 people and thousands of animals had died overnight, with no sign of fire or destruction. Lake Nyos, once serene, had become a silent killer, cloaked in mist. Can you picture it? A peaceful night, families fast asleep, and in just a few minutes, the entire village becomes a massive grave. No screams, no warnings, only death, quiet as cold mist. When nature unleashes fury, and when mankind plays God, the result is the same: irreversible tragedy. But not all disasters come from nature. Some are born of human pride. April 26, 1986. Chernobyl, Ukraine. A routine test spiraled into the worst nuclear disaster in history. Engineers wanted to see if turbines could generate power after a blackout, but they made a fatal mistake. They lowered the reactor's power too far, then disabled the very systems designed to protect them. With nothing left to stop it, the reactor exploded, taking with it the illusion of control over atomic power. So tell me, which frightens you more, the silent wrath of nature or the blind confidence of man? At 1:23 a.m., a blast ripped through the night sky, and from that moment on, the world was never the same. The reactor exploded, its 1,000-ton roof blown away like paper. Flames lit up the night. But the true horror wasn't the fire. It was what couldn't be seen: radiation, the invisible killer with no color, no smell, no warning. A radioactive cloud rose into the sky, spread across the land, seeped into every breath of wind. Firefighters rushed in, brave and unaware that they were walking straight into death. 31 people died that very night. But that was only the beginning. The radiation spread further than anyone imagined. Thousands more were marked for death, slow, silent, and inescapable. In Pripyat, panic took hold. Residents fled, leaving behind homes, memories, entire lives. The streets froze in time. Schools, hospitals, playgrounds, all silenced, as if awaiting the final breath of a lost world. And then, nature returned, as if trying to heal what humans had broken. So tell me, what's more terrifying than an explosion? Maybe it's what kills, without being seen, and offers nowhere to run. While radioactive dust still drifted over Europe after Chernobyl, another nightmare was rising from the ocean floor. The radioactive cloud spread quietly across Europe, sowing fear with every breath. But just years later, the ocean struck back. On December 26, 2004, a 9.1 magnitude quake shook the seafloor near Sumatra, lifting the ocean itself and unleashing a monstrous tsunami. Waves as tall as towers surged outward like nature's war drums. But before they struck, something eerie happened. The sea pulled back, exposing coral, sand, and silence, as if the ocean held its breath. Before roaring in rage, if you saw the sea retreat, would you run or watch in wonder? Sometimes, beauty is death in disguise. What would you do if the sea suddenly pulled away, exposing the ocean floor? Would you run or step closer? In just minutes, the ocean that once kissed the shore began retreating, exposing wet sand, rocks, and stranded sea creatures. This phenomenon, called sea withdrawal, is the clearest and deadliest sign of an approaching tsunami. In Thailand and Indonesia, many didn't realize the danger. They walked farther out, mesmerized by the rare sight, unaware that death was gathering strength offshore. Out at sea, massive waves were building, gaining speed and height, and as they neared land, they transformed into walls of water. The first impact struck Sumatra's coast, where waves up to 30 meters high slammed the shore with unstoppable force. If you saw the sea vanish, would you retreat or move closer? Because sometimes the most beautiful moment is nature's final warning. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. Entire coastal towns were swallowed, thousands swept away by the ocean's unstoppable force. The tsunami surged through Thailand, India, Sri Lanka, even reached the eastern shores of Africa. Homes were shattered, trees ripped from the earth, cars stacked like broken toys, over 230,000 lives lost, millions left homeless. But nature had done this before. On November 1st, 1755, Lisbon woke under golden sunlight, narrow streets glowing with warmth, church bells ringing in peaceful air. No one knew. The ground beneath was fracturing, and the sea beyond was rising. In the most beautiful moment, death began, a monstrous earthquake, a violent tsunami, and then fire consumed what remained, an entire city crushed between earth, water, and ash. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook all of Lisbon. Elegant Baroque facades swayed like sails in a storm, then crumbled like dust. In just minutes, peaceful streets turned into a choking hell of rubble and chaos. The earthquake, estimated at 8.5 to 9 on the Richter scale, crushed the heart of Portugal. As the ground kept trembling, survivors fled to open squares and the banks of the Tagus River, believing those wide spaces would save them. But they didn't know. A greater terror was approaching. The sea began to retreat, leaving ships stranded in the harbor. And then, a massive tsunami surged into the city, swallowing the port, sweeping away what was still standing. The ocean didn't just bring water, it brought the end. Water swept away homes and lives, flooding deep into the heart of the city like a beast unleashed through broken walls. But the nightmare wasn't over. Fires began to spread, fanned by winds into a blazing inferno, consuming even buildings that had survived both quake and wave. For days, Lisbon burned, black smoke cloaking the skies. A city once known for wealth and splendor, now smoldered in ash and silence. But the devastation did not stop there. The waves reached Cadiz in Spain, the Moroccan coast, even the distant Antilles of the Caribbean. Europe stood in shock, not only at the destruction, but at the terrifying question it raised. If such grandeur could fall in minutes, what are we really in the vastness of this fragile world? Lisbon, once a gleaming jewel of the Atlantic, reduced to smoldering ruin. More than 30,000, perhaps 70,000, lives lost in just hours of terror. But human history holds an even greater catastrophe, one that didn't just destroy a city, it nearly wiped out our entire species. Around 74,000 years ago, in what is now Sumatra, an ancient fault line cracked open, and Mount Toba awoke after millennia of silence. This eruption wasn't like anything seen in modern times. It unleashed trillions of tons of magma, creating a caldera the size of a city, and blanketed the sky with ash so thick sunlight could no longer reach the earth. Day became night, crops failed, animals vanished. The global temperature plummeted, triggering a volcanic winter that lasted for years. An extinction event, slow and silent. At that point, the human population may have dropped to just a few thousand survivors. A genetic bottleneck in our evolution, the edge of oblivion. And from those few, we carried on, fragile but unbroken, and wrote the next chapter of survival. This was a super eruption, a wrath of Earth beyond anything we can imagine. Toba hurled trillions of tons of ash into the sky, triggering a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Sunlight vanished, global temperatures plunged, and a brief, brutal ice age swept across the planet. Plants withered in darkness, animals died, entire food chains collapsed, and humanity nearly vanished. Scientists believe the human population may have dropped to just a few thousand survivors, scattered in rare, habitable pockets of the world. From the edge of extinction, they endured, and they are the ancestors of us all. After the Toba eruption, humanity began a new journey, but the cost was immense. A severe genetic bottleneck left a mark on our DNA that we still carry today. Lake Toba, calm and glass-like, is the massive scar that remains from the supervolcano that nearly ended us. But Earth's fury never sleeps. On April 26, 1989, over the villages of Daulatpur and Saturia in Bangladesh, the sky darkened ominously. The monsoon's humid heat rose fast, clashing with dry, cool air from the north. A collision of air masses, combined with low atmospheric pressure, created the perfect storm. The sky twisted, black clouds coiled like whips, and then a monstrous tornado touched down. In the heart of the storm, a tornado began to form, slowly twisting down from the sky until it touched the earth. What started as a narrow column of swirling air quickly became an uncontrollable monster. Winds exceeded 400 kilometers per hour. As the tornado tore through the villages of Daulatpur and Saturia, where most homes were made of brick and thatched roofs, they were ripped from their foundations, flung into the air like straw. Trees were uprooted and hurled like missiles. Livestock and people were swept away. Unable to find shelter, the villages were reduced to rubble. Nothing left but scattered debris across a shattered landscape. Livestock, vital to the local economy, was nearly wiped out in a matter of minutes. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. Around 1,300 people lost their lives. Thousands more were injured. But less than 2 decades earlier, Bangladesh had faced an even greater fury. On November 12, 1970, warm waters of the Bay of Bengal began to churn. A tropical storm was born, and soon it became the deadly cyclone known as Bhola. Fueled by ocean heat, Bhola intensified rapidly. Winds reached 185 kilometers per hour, and as it neared the coast of Bangladesh, the sea began to rise, forming a massive storm surge. Waves as high as 10 meters slammed into the Ganges Delta, a wall of water wiping out everything in its path. Homes made of mud and thatch collapsed instantly, and millions, caught in the floodplain, faced the silent, unstoppable wrath of the sea. With its deadly combination of wind and water, Cyclone Bhola claimed over 300,000 lives in just a few hours. Villages vanished, fields destroyed, and millions left without a way to survive. But the tragedy went beyond death. It sparked a political awakening. Pakistan's inadequate response ignited mass outrage, eventually leading to Bangladesh's war for independence in 1971. Yet if Bhola could reshape a nation, some events have reshaped the world itself. Around 3 billion years ago, a colossal asteroid named S2, nearly 50 kilometers wide, came hurtling toward Earth from the depths of the solar system. And its impact changed everything. S2 wasn't just an asteroid, it was larger than the one that would later wipe out the dinosaurs. As it entered Earth's atmosphere, the sky ignited with blinding white light. S2 plummeted at unimaginable speed, and in a single instant, it slammed into the planet, unleashing energy equal to 700 Hiroshima bombs. The impact carved a massive crater, vaporizing everything nearby. The Earth shook violently. Shockwaves raced across the globe, tearing at the freshly formed continents. The oceans reared up near the strike zone. The sea exploded outward, giving rise to a megatsunami, with waves so massive they defy description, sweeping across coastlines, as if Earth itself was cleansing the wound it had just received. The devastation was total. Earth's atmosphere choked with dust and debris, blocking sunlight, plunging the planet into prolonged darkness. This mega flood rewrote the path of evolution, triggering a mass extinction that reshaped the primitive ecosystem. The climate grew erratic, temperatures plummeted, and life fought to survive on a transformed world. But sometimes, it doesn't take an asteroid. Sometimes, we create disasters ourselves. On October 9th, 1963, deep in the eastern Alps of northern Italy, Mount Toc had been warning for years. Cracks in the rock, subtle ground shifts, all ignored as the massive Vajont Dam was built below. A towering reservoir was formed, water pushed dangerously close to the mountain's flank, building pressure that nature could no longer bear. As water levels in the reservoir rose, so did the pressure within the valley walls. Then, on the night of October 9th, 1963, after a day of relentless rain, disaster struck. At around 10:39 p.m., a massive section of Mount Toc gave way. Millions of cubic meters of earth and rock plunged into Lake Vajont. The impact displaced an enormous surge of water, so powerful it rose over the top of the dam. A man-made tsunami, towering like a skyscraper, crashed down into the valley below. Water, mud, and debris swept through everything in its path. The villages of Longarone, Pirago, Villanova, and others were erased within minutes. Homes pulverized, trees uprooted, roads turned into rivers of ruin. Nature didn't explode, but mankind triggered its own destruction. Nearly 2,000 people died in the Vajont disaster, many still asleep in their homes. But less than 50 years later, another catastrophe struck, this time from the sea and from the atom. On March 11th, 2011, a massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake shook northeastern Japan. What followed was a tsunami, with waves up to 40 meters tall, towering walls of water crashing into land. Villages, ships, cars, entire towns were swept away within minutes. Nearly 20,000 lives were lost, but the nightmare wasn't over. The waves breached the defenses of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, flooding the backup generators, the only systems keeping the reactors cool. And once that cooling failed, the countdown began toward one of the worst nuclear accidents in human history. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. With no power and no cooling system, the reactors began to overheat by the hour. Then, within just a few hours, a nuclear disaster was imminent. Hydrogen explosions rocked 3 reactors, shattering their containment buildings and releasing radiation into the environment. Thousands were evacuated, but the damage was already done. Radiation spread across soil, water, and air, turning Fukushima into a ghost region. Farmers lost everything. Fishing came to a halt, an invisible catastrophe, with consequences that would last for decades. But if Fukushima was a silent killer, in China, back in 1931, nature roared. That summer, the Yellow River began to swell, carrying with it the greatest flood fury the nation had ever seen. The Yellow River, long known as China's sorrow, was about to write one of history's darkest chapters. In July 1931, relentless rains poured from a series of storms. Rivers and reservoirs swelled beyond capacity. Then, on August 18th, the Yellow River broke its banks, unleashing a torrent that erased everything in its path. Cities, villages, farmlands, drowned beneath an ocean of floodwater. Millions of acres of fertile land were lost, homes washed away, and millions of people were left trapped. No shelter, no food, no hope. Estimates range from 1 to 4 million deaths, not just from drowning, but from the famine and disease that followed, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. The flood didn't just take lives, it destroyed the land that fed millions, triggering a massive food shortage and plunging China into a humanitarian crisis unlike any before. But nature's fury would strike again, centuries earlier. On the morning of January 23rd, 1556, the province of Shanxi was shaken awake. An earthquake, estimated at magnitude 8, tore through the land, unleashing the deadliest seismic event ever recorded. Traditional homes, made of packed earth, collapsed like cards, burying entire families in seconds. The region's hilly terrain, dense population, and fragile architecture turned the landscape into a death trap. In one morning, the earth opened, and hundreds of thousands vanished into silence. Many in Shanxi lived in yaodongs, man-made cave dwellings dug into mountain slopes. But when the quake struck, the hills themselves collapsed, burying families alive in total darkness. The disaster didn't just shatter buildings. The earth itself turned against its people. Massive cracks split the ground, mountains crumbled, rivers changed course, triggering floods. An estimated 830,000 people perished, making it the deadliest earthquake in recorded human history. Over 2 centuries later, another crack would split the earth, this time in Iceland. On June 8, 1783, the ground ruptured open and Laki began to erupt. For 8 months, Laki erupted relentlessly. Rivers of lava scorched the earth, while towering plumes of toxic gas choked the skies of Iceland in endless darkness. The ground trembled. Villages were destroyed. Air and water turned poisonous. Half of Iceland's livestock died, and famine followed. 1 in 4 people perished. But Laki didn't stop at Iceland. Sulfur dioxide and ash spread across Europe, forming a dense fog that cloaked the continent through the summer of 1783. Sunlight faded, temperatures dropped, crops failed, famine spread, riots erupted, and Europe spiraled into an economic crisis like never before. In Asia, Laki's shadow lingered. Weakened monsoons brought drought, crippling food production and affecting millions. But nearly 2 centuries later, it wasn't nature. It was mankind that unleashed a nightmare. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, in Bhopal, India, a pesticide plant suffered a catastrophic safety failure. A lethal gas, methyl isocyanate, began to leak uncontrollably. By 12:30 a.m., a deadly cloud spread over the city, seeping into homes, streets, and markets, reaching the dreams of those fast asleep. 500,000 people were exposed, coughing, blinded, suffocating, in their own homes within hours. Over 3,000 people were dead, most trying to flee an invisible killer in the night. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. In the weeks that followed, the death toll in Bhopal climbed past 15,000. Water, air, and soil were poisoned, leaving behind chronic illnesses, birth defects, and a generation marked by invisible scars. A man-made disaster, with consequences far beyond human control. But over a century earlier, another catastrophe erupted from deep within the earth, this time with fire and thunder. At 10 a.m., August 27th, 1883, Krakatoa, the fiery island of Indonesia, exploded. The main eruption released energy equal to 200 megatons of TNT. The sound was heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away, even in Australia. Shockwaves circled the globe, recorded for up to 5 days. The sky turned black, even in the middle of day. The sea roared under impossible force. Massive tsunamis raced outward like wild beasts, slamming into nearby islands with terrifying speed. Entire villages were erased, swallowed by angry water. An estimated 36,000 people died. Some swept away by waves, others buried under choking ash. But the devastation didn't stop at Earth's surface. Vast amounts of volcanic ash rose into the atmosphere, triggering global climate shifts. Winters grew colder, summers eerily cooler. For years, the skies changed. Sunsets and sunrises burned crimson across the globe for months. Beautiful, haunting. These visions found their way into art, including the fiery skies captured by British artist William Ashcroft, a strange, stunning beauty, born from disaster. At 3:23 p.m. on May 31st, 1970, the ground shook violently in Peru's Ancash region. A 7.9 magnitude quake ripped through the Andes, dislodging an enormous wall of ice and rock. Snow, mud, and debris merged into a deadly avalanche, rushing down the mountainside like a white dragon. Within minutes, the town of Yungay was buried. Homes, trees, lives, all swallowed by cold earth. Of the town's 25,000 residents, only about 400 survived. Many were children, spared only because they were at a traveling circus. And if nature can erase a town, humans too can obliterate a city. On May 30th, 1626, Beijing lit up for a moment, then vanished in the Wangongchang explosion. Around noon, a deafening blast echoed across Beijing. The Wangongchang Armory exploded, unleashing a force so violent it shook the very soul of the Ming capital. Temples, homes, and entire city blocks were obliterated in an instant, buried beneath choking dust. A towering mushroom cloud rose above the city, casting a dark shadow over the imperial heart. Stones, wood, and twisted metal rained down like fire. The streets became a war zone. An estimated 20,000 lives were lost in seconds. But the most chilling part is that no one ever discovered exactly what caused the explosion. To this day, the Wangongchang disaster remains one of China's greatest unsolved mysteries. On December 6, 1917, a cold winter morning in Halifax, Canada turned into a nightmare. Two ships, France's Mont Blanc, carrying tons of wartime explosives, and Belgium's SS Emo, collided in a narrow harbor channel. Mont Blanc caught fire, and minutes later exploded with the force of 3 kilotons of TNT. The blast leveled neighborhoods, shattered the harbor, and left over 1,600 dead, thousands injured. Glass shattered miles away, and a mushroom cloud rose 3.5 kilometers into the frozen sky. The Halifax explosion became a haunting symbol, humanity's first encounter with destruction on a near-nuclear scale. The sea receded after the Halifax explosion, only to return in a tidal wave, flooding the city's lowlands. Spilled oil ignited, setting the streets ablaze. 2,000 dead, 9,000 injured, but Earth has faced far worse. About 640,000 years ago, beneath Yellowstone in North America, a massive magma chamber began to swell. Pressure built until the surface gave way, unleashing one of the most powerful explosions in Earth's history. A super eruption with force greater than thousands of atomic bombs flattened everything for hundreds of kilometers. Ash darkened the skies, triggering a volcanic winter. If it happens again, civilization may not survive. If these stories made you pause and reflect, leave a comment, drop a heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep exploring the fragile yet unbreakable beauty of life. But beneath the ashes that buried the earth were seeds still waiting to bloom. Nature doesn't just destroy, it remembers, it rebuilds, it returns. If life could survive this, what else are we capable of enduring? Across each catastrophe, the earth stitched itself back together. Forests regrew, rivers rewrote their paths, and species evolved in the shadow of ruin. Isn't that proof enough that resilience is written into the fabric of life? Even when skies turned black and the ground swallowed cities, something always rose again. Not just trees and mountains, but hope. How many times must the earth break before we listen? In every eruption, every flood, every trembling fault line, there's a message. Nothing lasts forever. Not destruction, not despair. So what legacy do we leave? If we know the planet can turn in an instant, and if we faced another catastrophe tomorrow, what would we fight to save? Perhaps, in losing everything, we come closest to understanding what truly matters. Because history isn't just made of ash and ruins. It's made of those who dared to rise from them. If you want to continue discovering untold mysteries, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because the next video might change the way you see the universe.